Thanks, everybody. So yeah, I think some of you have been attending previous sessions of the Sigma Data series. Essentially, we are trying to, help break down some of the groundwater data challenges. How do we keep data useful and reliable and local? We've learned a lot about data management over the years, working with GSAs, and so we figured it would be a good idea to share perspectives with other folks thinking about the same kinds of things. And the previous three sessions were kind of about building our data foundation. What to collect, how to collect it, how to, store and manage it. And today is more about kind of what you do with that foundation, how you make the data work for you and, use it for management. So that's kind of what we are focusing on would be, water accounting. And kind of focusing on water accounting for the purpose of allocations, because that is what our experience base is. All right, so I'm going to start off with a bit of a recap of our previous sessions, just to kind of contextualize where water accounting sits for us. So dialing it way back to session one, data management is absolutely crucial to Sigma. It's really fundamental to Sigma's primary goal, which is sustainability by 2040. I know, all of us are kind of familiar with this. Basically, every basin gets there differently, right? Each GSA has different conditions, different overdraft. So that's kind of one of the primary goal. Sigma's also designed to, make sure that groundwater is managed at the local level. That's its aim. Obviously, it doesn't always succeed, but local control only holds as long as you can prove that it's working. That's kind of where the data comes in. Data management is basically the infrastructure that helps you be defensible when it comes to autonomy for your basin, when it comes to reporting for the state, and it helps you make decisions, right, to move towards sustainability. Kind of like I think of it as like receipts for the state, right? Here's what we've been doing. Here's how it's been impacting our groundwater conditions and our basin. You stay credible. It really helps you kind of build that groundwater picture and that story. And so thinking about that, this is kind of the pyramid that we have been grounding our sessions in, is that data is really about building a strong foundation so that you can make those decision-making, right? Decision-making is the top priority. That's what you want your data to help you do. But it's kind of hard to envision how you get there when your data is starting off messy, unconnected, disconnected. And so we want to build that foundation from the ground up. Starting off with, raw data collection, which was our session 2. How do you collect it? How do you make sure that that collection is, standardized while still providing flexibility? And then session 3, we kind of moved into data processing, data storage, making sure that that data is stored neatly, that it's connected to each other. And then finally, your absolute goal for everybody is to get to decision making. I think that a lot of people have data, right, that you're starting off with, but without purpose and structure, it kind of feels like noise, right? It's a bit messy and disconnected. So the goal is to kind of clean it up and make sure that it provides a clear picture of your basin conditions, your local conditions, that it can help you identify trends, patterns, and progress. So moving into session 2 a little bit. Session 2, as I mentioned, was all about data collection. Manual collection is kind of the baseline. Everybody's kind of starting off with that. But the natural next step to that is kind of digitizing some of those manual workflows to kind of make sure that you are getting data that's clean, that's validated, removing steps of the process to make sure that there's some automation, that entry is only happening once. So this step is kind of mostly about making sure that the data itself is high quality, collected, frequently enough and consistently enough that it is useful and reliable. Oh, that's my bad. Right. So, just kind of trying to mitigate some of those pain points of manual collection to make sure that your data is trustworthy. And then, so that was session 2. Moving into session 3, we kind of started to talk about, the common data problem that I was just talking about. Data collection is happening. There's, everybody's likely doing some level of data collection. You have something, you want to make sure that you're leveraging what you already have, but it's living in kind of different locations. There's different versions. There are different data sets that aren't talking to each other. And as a result, the data is not showing a clear picture or informing your decisions for sustainability or for local control. And so we really believe that good data management is about creating those links, right? Creating those relationships between data, making sure that data is talking to each other, so that it can support things like water accounting, actions like water accounting at scale. So the foundation of, first raw data collection, but then also how you're storing your data, how you're managing your data, that foundation really determines what is possible at the next stage. And so a good example of this is kind of, relational databases. That's kind of what we were trying to drive home in the last session, session 3. It was about storing and managing data, trying to drive home that, everybody's coming at it from a different place and there are multiple ways to do things. We really believe that, flat spreadsheets that aren't connected to each other makes it really difficult to build those links. And so it's important to build towards some sort of relational database, which enforces those links between those different data sets. So for example, in the case of water accounting, and particularly water accounting for allocations, you have an owner who owns a parcel. The parcel contains a well upon it, and the well is extracting a groundwater extraction volume. All of these items are connected assets that will tell a coherent story if managed properly. And then kind of driving home something that we were talking about in session 1 actually is that the data that you collect, what data you choose to collect is driven by policy, right? So, you have a policy which informs what type of data you need, but it's also a reciprocal relationship where, that data, once you start collecting it, once you get further along in the process, that starts to inform your next policy move. So, your data will start to tell you where to go next based on the trends and the patterns that you're seeing in the data. So a good example of this is allocations, right? The GSAs that we work with are, tackling overdraft mostly from the demand side, which involves an allocation policy, right? So this is really an example of how policy informs data, right? Allocation policy is a document. It has rules listed, it's a long document, and it's kind of hard to make sense of. And so the goal is to turn that document into calculations, something that can actually make sense, right? Translating that document using water accounting. So how much can be pumped, how it's calculated, fees, those are all the rules that are in the allocation policy. That policy document determines what kind of data is needed. So usage data, precipitation data, and then the goal is that the further along that you get, that data that you are collecting will inform what policy action is needed next. So really kind of the crux of Sigma, the way that it works is there's 2 main options, boiling it down really, really crudely. There's 2 main options for how to mitigate overdraft and to balance your subbasin or your GSA. So those 2 strategies are supply augmentation or getting more water into the ground, and then demand management, which is, pumping less, making sure there's less water extracted from the ground. Most GSAs, most basins are obviously doing that with a combination of both, but in all cases, you need to be able to measure groundwater and water generally and kind of track the ins and outs. So, what's going in, what's coming out. This is water accounting, right? This whole thing. And then demand management in particular requires really robust data management because often you are applying allocations or fees, and those pumping limits really depend on knowing how much water is being used And then that's both for the GSA and the grower, right? So this session, we're mostly going to focus on water accounting for demand management and in particular for allocations. As I said, that's kind of um, our niche, and it's what we've been working on with GSAs. Right, okay. So that was kind of a speed run of the last 3 sessions and kind of where we're at. Are there any questions or anything to add before I move on? I know that was a lot. That was kind of summarizing 3 hours of of our last sessions in 5 minutes. All right, great. And Rob, if you don't mind, I can't always see the screen, so if you want to help me, just stop me if there's questions. And before I get into the main sections, yeah, if there are questions or comments, discussion topics, feel free to either put them in the chat, raise your hand. We're not going to try to save all the questions for the end. I think it's helpful to address them as they come up, so feel free to stop me. All right, so as I mentioned, there's supply augmentation, demand management. We're mostly focusing on demand management. And for our purposes, water accounting is essentially a ledger of water as a managed asset. So, that's the tracking of the water coming in, the water going out, and then at different kind of scales. So basin-wide, GSA-wide, parcel level. Yeah, and for a lot of this, we will focus on parcel level because that's kind of the most granular level of water accounting. But the scale really does depend on policy, right? Whether it's basin-wide, whether it's parcel level. At the basin level, that's kind of the complete picture, or the GSA level, that's the complete picture of your management area, the pumping, the precipitation, the recharge, several other inputs as well, like canal seepage, river seepage, and surface water coming in and out. As I mentioned, different GSAs have unique conditions, and so might have different tracking needs. So if we zoom out, it's basically about finding out the water balance in your basin or in your GSA, and what came in, what came out, what is stored, and that can be broken down to the inputs and then the outputs. So the inputs would be precipitation and surface water delivery. So what is being brought in to the farm, or I guess into the basin, recharge, things like that. And then the outputs are what is being removed. So that's groundwater extraction. Sometimes people measure that by using evapotranspiration. Sometimes there's also surface water exports. If you're incorporating surface water into your water accounting, then that would be an output too. And then once you have a complete basin ledger, you can start to see patterns, right? You can see wet years versus dry years. You can see which areas in your basin recharge is happening, which areas in your basin the extraction is the heaviest. So that's kind of where it becomes a little bit more granular, right? When you're kind of seeing at the parcel level where extraction is happening, then some of those patterns become more clear. And this really is the picture that allows a GSA to tell the state that, this is where we're at, right? This is what our basin conditions are. This is where our overdraft is at. Not just we're doing things to reach sustainability, but here's the data that actually proves that. So it's really crucial to being able to be defensible. And then at the parcel level, it really just means tracking exactly what has been used, what a grower has pumped, what the grower has received from surface water, from precipitation, whether they have recharge credits, and then what their balance is against their allocation. So as I mentioned, we're coming at it from the context of allocations, where it becomes extremely crucial that it's happening at the parcel level, because you want not only for the grower to be able to track their water usage against their allocation, but for the GSA to kind of identify trends and see what's working. And then to be clear, water accounting is not just tracking pumping and groundwater extraction. It's, pumping is one input, but a full water accounting picture layers in kind of some other inputs as well. So, precipitation credits, recharge, carryover, and then sometimes that leads towards trading and transferring. So I kind of think of it as like an analogy, like you know, my electricity bill, right? So you can see in my electricity bill, I can see exactly what I've used, why I'm being charged, what I'm being charged, how much I'm being charged for my usage. And then I have the decision-making power to make decisions about that. So, use less AC or get solar or whatever that might be. So that's kind of an analogy to what good water accounting can do for a grower. It provides that visibility, that agency. So obviously these are not the only inputs that would go into a water ledger, but these are kind of some of the greatest hits, maybe is how I would describe it. Yeah, so at a bit of a crude level, this is kind of where we're thinking of the water ledger. Anything to add? Any questions? All right, moving on. Okay, so when we're thinking about water accounting for allocations, we think of it with three foundational base units that we are making sure that we have the data for, so that we can manage that groundwater and track it accurately. So those three units would be a well, a parcel, and a water account. So there's, a well, which exists on a parcel. A parcel is tracked within a water account. And for a water account, we kind of think of that as the ledger itself. You can kind of think of it like a bank account where it tracks all of the activity for, a group of parcels, and manages it as a single entity. So you can group multiple parcels into a water account if you want to manage them as a single entity. You can split them if you want to track them separately. One important example of why you might want to track those parcels as separate entities would be that if a grower has parcels in two different GSAs, those parcels must be in separate water accounts, right? Because different GSAs have different rules, and so they would have different water accounting ledgers. GSAs are all using kind of similar but different inputs, similar but different calculations. And so you would think of it like a checking account versus a savings account, right? There's different rules applied to each of those accounts. And so as a result, you manage those assets separately.
Hey Tara,
Yeah.
um, do you have sub-ledgers for each account, or do you have a master ledger and then you track, then you can just pull for an account from that master ledger? How are you managing that in the back end?
I'm going to let Rob take the back end side of that.
It's a good question. So you can summarize for individual water accounts, or you can summarize for a watermark account, which would be your master account of all of your water accounts rolled up to one. It works if you are all in the same GSA, but if you're summarizing by your entire watermark account, the master account, you're going to be including different GSAs with different allocation rules. So that's where it can get a little bit but it would show you that, but you can do it on the two different levels, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And this
thank you.
really became like more examples that we've come across is these assets, as I'm going to call them, the parcels, the wells in this scenario, they can change hands. People are selling them. They're already in the process of registering wells. We have people that are selling off their land, other assets. So those are going to transpire and go to different water accounts. But the thing that stays the same for you as an individual would be your water account ID. That is not being transferred. And that needs to stay stationary and attached to you in the case of further down the road if credits start becoming a thing or you're receiving different balances. You want those to remain, in some cases, with the water account, not the asset itself.
Oh, so an asset would be anchored to a water ID. And so if you transfer that asset, then it just the ID gets modified.
Your water account ID does not. But let's say a parcel gets split into, it's a 40-acre parcel, and now they want to split into two 20-acre parcels. They change the APN addresses. And so your assets, in this case, your parcels and your wells, those addresses can change, but your water account ID will not.
Right.
Okay. It's a big conversation.
And they're actively happening right now. So we're dealing with them as they come
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, definitely more than is possible for a 1 hour convo. But yeah, it's a big topic. And that's kind of why we drive home the idea of a water account, is because wells and parcels are changeable assets, right, that can change hands. And you need something that remains static that you can assign an ID to and have that be the asset under which it's all tracked, right? You can audit all of that. So
And it
you can,
becomes, Tara is going to get to it, becomes even more of a conversation as surface water gets brought into the equation, because now you're doing deliveries to a water account that needs a specific ID attached to it. So it becomes even more fun.
yeah, and then I think I had one more thought, which is gone from my brain. So we'll just continue. All right. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're talking a lot about allocations right now. And so really, there's a few different buckets that we think about when it comes to allocations that are also part of the ledger. So this is not just about water in and out. This is also about how GSAs are managing that water, what they are providing to the grower in terms of credits, in terms of pumping limits. And so this also then all becomes kind of part of the ledger. You need to be able to compare how much a grower has extracted against their total pumping limit. And then you need to be able to track all of those water data points. So kind of three of the classic ledger buckets that we're going to consider, and this is by no means a final list. It's kind of just three that might be well recognized by GSAs, would be native sustainable yield. So that's your base allocation. It's the amount that you can safely extract, and that's a basin-wide number, right? Which is the amount of water that can be safely extracted from the GSA, from the basin, without causing overdraft. So when you're going into the allocations level, you are distributing that in different ways. It could be by acre, it could be by pumping zone. I'll touch on that in a minute, but it's basically saying you're only allowed to pump X amount of water, because if you do more than that, then that is overdraft. That's more than can be replenished into that basin. And then another one of those three kind of main ledger buckets that we're thinking of would be transitional or ramp down credits. Not every GSA does this with allocations, but this is extra water that's phased down year to year, just to transition growers off of overdraft. Because, you know, in GSAs and in basins that are implementing allocations, they're in overdraft currently, which means that they are pumping more than is sustainable already. And so you can't really, it's very difficult to snap from, you know, a massive overdraft to sustainable yield overnight. So this is kind of a way to phase that down over a few years. So, you know, you give somebody, let's say 0.5 acre feet per acre in sustainable yield. Maybe you'll give them, you know, 1 acre foot per acre of transitional allocation in the first year, and then 0.8, and then 0.6, 0.4, 0.2. That might be an example of how you phase it down over a few years. And then groundwater credits, that is basically the way that the GSA applies value to your native sustainable yield. And so if last year I used less than my native sustainable yield, I might get that as a groundwater credit that I can then use the following year to supplement my native sustainable yield and my transitional allocation. Sometimes growers can earn groundwater credits through doing recharge, so saying that, you know, I'm offsetting my pumping by adding more water into the ground. Sometimes GSAs will give surface water credits as well to apply to a grower's kind of ledger or allocation budget. So, you know, what's happening now basically is that when you apply an allocation, right, some growers have more than they need and some have less than they need, which creates natural conditions for a water market, but also natural conditions for people to look for supply in other ways. And so once you assign allocations and track them against actual water usage, groundwater becomes a finite asset, which is a very different relationship to that resource than we've had in the past. Any thoughts before I move on? I feel like I'm packing a lot into one slide, which is why I'm asking after each slide. Okay, so you know, I think everybody is kind of on the same page about this, but I did kind of want to talk about why water accounting is important. I think everybody is, knows why it might be important for the GSA to have a good understanding of, water accounting and water conditions and water levels in the basin, right? That's their job, to manage water. But why is that important for GSAs and for growers? Particularly in the case of allocations, you as a grower wouldn't necessarily accept, an allocation without visibility into how it's calculated. Similarly, you wouldn't accept a utility bill without a usage breakdown, right? You want to know what you're being charged for. You want to know what's being limited and where you're at with it. And so, the GSAs that we work with actually started doing water accounting, both at a GSA-wide level and at the grower level, well before allocations were in place. So part of that is to build data history and to help, growers understand where they're at with their water before those limits kick in. So you can see that, okay, I'm running out of water in July, so I might need to import some more surface water for the rest of the water year. For that reason, and then also to kind of iron out some of the calculations and make sure that the data that you're collecting and the way that you're presenting it to the grower, the way those calculations are going, are defensible, right? You're building trust because allocations is really difficult for everybody. You want to make sure that that data is transparent to the grower to make sure that they are satisfied and that they understand what they're supposed to do from a decision-making standpoint, from a financial standpoint, what to plant, whether to fallow, what might be profitable, if there are fees being imposed. Because as I mentioned, now groundwater is a finite asset, which it did not used to be. All right. Okay, and so we kind of talked about what goes into the allocation ledger, right? To do an allocation, to implement it successfully, you need to be able to measure that pumping limit against the actual groundwater being extracted. So that's why you're tracking water. You can't have it without measuring water being used. So there's a couple approaches to that. There's flow meters, and then there's ET. Again, I think people are kind of familiar with this, but there are trade-offs with both. Some of the GSAs that we work with are using ET data partly because if you have 3,000 wells and hundreds of growers, hundreds or thousands of growers, it's very difficult to enforce that everybody install a meter. And so this provides kind of a little bit of an easier, more scalable way to measure groundwater and to allow growers who don't have meters to measure their groundwater, right? So that's kind of, one of the main approaches is using ET, evapotranspiration. So that the downside of that is that it does not provide direct pumping measurements. So if you're limiting the amount of pumping that a grower is doing, ET won't show you how much a grower is pumping. So there are some, additional calculations that need to be done. But at the same time, it allows GSAs to kind of have a basin-wide picture without necessarily collecting meter readings from everybody. And then alternatively, meters obviously provide the pumping data directly. Nothing needs to be backed out, but it's costly. And we experienced kind of some of the challenges with this when we worked with probationary basins, a probationary basin, probationary GSAs in Tulare Lake Sub-Basin. And I would well, actually, wait, first, I'm just going to say, are there any questions yet? If not, I'll just start to get into the case studies. All right. I think Rob will let me know if there are questions. Okay, yeah, so basically, why is measurement so important? Measurement becomes really important in water accounting when you have to figure out exactly how much you're using and you don't have a meter. So for example, we work with a few GSAs in Tulare Lake Subbasin. Two of the three that we work with don't have meters on all the wells. And so those two GSAs, South Fork Kings and Mid Kings River GSA, contracted with an ET provider, Land IQ, to estimate groundwater usage. So the thing with ET is that it measures the total crop water consumption, but it doesn't distinguish the source of that water. So you need to do that back calculation. These GSAs had a reporting deadline because they're under probation, and growers were required to report their groundwater usage to the state without meters, which kind of, as you can imagine, provides a bit of a challenge, a bit being an under-exaggeration. So what that means is that water accounting kind of had to play a real-world role of helping growers do their reporting if they didn't know how much groundwater they were using. So we did kind of a back calculation or a calculation to allow growers to estimate their groundwater pumping because they could see their ET data on the platform, on the water accounting platform. They had to, the GSA applied a precipitation amount, which was then subtracted from that total ET data. So that means that of the amount of water that the crop used, X amount of it was provided by precipitation, natural precipitation, rain. And then another unknown amount of it was provided by surface water, right? Each grower applies a different amount of surface water. Some are reliant entirely upon groundwater, some have surface water as well. And so basically we had the growers enter their known surface water amounts into the system. And then a crop efficiency factor was applied to that. And then what remained was their estimated groundwater pumping. So one of the challenges there is that sometimes a grower doesn't know how much surface water has been applied. And then another challenge is that oftentimes surface water districts don't always track deliveries by parcel. They can track it by turnout, they can track it by account name, and that account might cover multiple parcels, which again kind of indicates why a water account is a crucial foundational unit. It kind of bridges how surface water districts track water and then what the GSA or the grower needs for accounting and kind of matches those IDs to each other. Rob, anything to add here?
No, not yet. I don't think so.
Okay, great.
Hey, Tara, this is Spencer. I do have a question.
Yeah, please.
So when it sounds like you're talking about reporting in the context of probationary basins. So with that probationary reporting, those basins are required to provide like parcel level water balances, kind of not at the GSA or another level.
No.
Wow.
So,
okay, that's
it's pretty
super
intense.
granular.
It's very granular, yeah. And it's not the GSA themselves who are required to do it. If a GSA is under probation, and this is happening currently as we speak with Tulare Lake Subbasin. Tulare Lake Subbasin is under probation, and they had a reporting deadline of May 1st. By May 1st, each grower who received a letter from the state had to report on all their wells, kind of a bunch of well records that they had to put, as well as estimated groundwater pumping. I can't remember exactly whether, because that state system is a bit different, but I can't remember whether they had to provide it by parcel or by well, but they had to provide a very granular picture.
I see. So, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry about that. Okay, I see. So basically, the reporting responsibility in the case of probationary basins is on the individual grower.
Yes, it's on the individual grower, which is why, like, oftentimes an individual grower is not always doing water accounting in the same way that the state needs it. And I know that, I think a lot of water accounting is talking about like standardization, right? You're doing local management, and so there's, everybody's unique, everybody's doing it in a different way. But then at the same time, the state is requiring its own version of water accounting. And so how do you kind of reconcile the two? So this was kind of our attempt to help growers who didn't really have any idea of that level of granularity, trying to help them, report to the state using water accounting and using a water accounting platform as well.
Yeah, geez. Yeah, super granular.
Very granular. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
I dropped an image into the chat for people to look at. I just wanted to differentiate between there are reporting needs that we're talking about that are for the GSA, and there's reporting needs that we're talking about for the state in their GEARS program. So the little image I put in there kind of helps you differentiate between those two different things that we're talking about. Sorry if that might have been a little confusing.
Yeah.
Which
Right.
was also confusing with some of the GSAs that we're working with. So that's why the image is created.
Yeah, it was very confusing for growers because, you're told that it's all being managed at the local level, but then for probationary basins, it's not. It's also being managed at the state level. And so the differences in reporting requirements for those two entities becomes very confusing for growers. And so it's important to try to standardize the accounting as much as possible to help mitigate that challenge. Right. So kind of what I was talking about was that, one of the main challenges was kind of adding in. So the ET data was already provided, right, by an ET provider. Precipitation was calculated by the GSA and added in and subtracted automatically by the system. What was really kind of a black box was the known surface water deliveries, right? GSAs don't always know their surface water deliveries. And equally, the way that surface water reporting works is slightly different. The way that surface water entities keep track of their deliveries. So that kind of brings us to another case study, which would be our work with another one of the GSAs that we work with, North Fork Kings. So in this case, North Fork Kings has 7 irrigation districts who are each collecting and storing surface water data differently, right? Same situation where growers don't have meters, right? So the GSA is contracting with an ET provider to provide estimates of evapotranspiration, but they are moving in the direction of an allocation, right? They're implementing an allocation, I believe, later this year. And so they're faced with a dilemma of, okay, we have this ET data, we have an allocation, but we need to be able to figure out how much groundwater each grower is actually using, right? Because if we're going to enforce an allocation and implement it, we need to know groundwater pumping for enforcement reasons and implementation reasons. And so there was no real standardized way to get surface water delivery data from those 7 different districts into one water accounting system, and connect that data to a water accounting system, right? It's exactly what we're talking about relational data. It's data living in different places that you need to bring into one place for it to actually work in your favor and help you figure out your conditions. So they asked us to kind of build an interface for surface water districts to use to directly enter delivery data into the platform and then connect those IDs to the accounts, the groundwater accounts. I'm going to let Rob take over here to kind of describe some of the back end stuff about that.
Yeah, and if anytime people have questions, just let me know. We'll go pretty quick. So we're starting with a field entry process. So there's actually an iOS application where a ditch tender in the field can go out and take readings from diversion points and input that information in. That information then flows through a routing system to the irrigation district administrative office, if you want to kind of think of it that way. They approve those deliveries, say this all looks correct, got on the field, we received the correct information. They can store that information into an administrative side of our water accounting system. And then that information then can be submitted to the GSA, and the GSA can receive that information on their side and then push it through to individual water accounts. So it's like the kind of the step-by-step process. To see what that looks like we're taking policy to something that's tangible. I think we have a couple screenshots of what that actually looks like in practice. So this would be on our platform, a irrigation district, a surface water entity has connected themselves to the watermark platform. And so at that point, the GSA can see on their side, they can see how many diversion points are being put in, which parcels those diversion points are attached to, how many ditch tenders are in the field, what kind of readings are coming in. And all of this is then at their fingertips to be able to see the information, and it's flowing to their side now. So there's an integration between the surface water entity and the GSA. And so if we go to the next clip, this would be what a GSA administrator would see. So some pieces on this page are, you can see that one of the columns is called ID approval. So this is saying the irrigation district has reviewed this information. They said it all looks correct, and they've said, yep, it's good to go. Go ahead and populate this into watermark accounts. And so now the GSA status is it's awaiting GSA approval. So the GSA can look at this and say, okay, this makes sense to me. The delivery distribution preview down below, I can see that there's parcels, APN numbers that are tied to water accounts. That looks correct. The account holder is on file. That looks correct. And then the delivery, the acre feet, where it's being distributed, and the percentages being pushed into those accounts looks correct. And so once they say good to go, they can just approve this, and in real time it flows into the end user's account for their surface water delivery amounts. And so this is taking another piece of that puzzle to try to give them a fuller picture of what's happening. Stop there and see if anybody has any questions to start.
Is seepage dealt with this on the back end as well at each turnout? Do you have seepage values or loss values on this that you're dealing with?
We have the capability to. We have not implemented that piece. I think they're kind of starting with like the lowest common denominator first and seeing how it goes. Like this little let's see how this goes first. It was getting to this point was a sizable effort that they took on. So, but yes, actually on here, and as well as the allocation piece of the module, we can take seepage and those types of things into account as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Consolidated, it's probably not worried about that as much as maybe somebody in South Fork Kings or Southwest Kings.
Yeah, a little further down.
Yeah, and this, we haven't really touched a lot on this, but a big challenge generally with data management is making sure that there's no duplication in the efforts, right? Obviously, it's impossible to have no duplication, but trying to reduce that, where growers have to put the same information in like 3 different places, or data is held by, 8 different entities in this case, right? Data that's needed that, everybody kind of ideally would be sharing is held in 8 different places in the 7 different irrigation districts and then in the GSA. So this is an effort to kind of try to connect that data to make sure that it's relational, kind of what we were talking about, and connected so that it actually is useful in, to GSAs and the grower. So that is a really big challenge, is getting everybody to say, yes, we're all going to share data and we're going to share data with each other.
Is a fundamental component of relational databases a single source for data, or can you have duplicative data that the relational database can choose a single source from? I don't know if that question is that was kind of half baked, but do what you can with it. I guess put differently, if you have multiple, okay, you have 3 districts and they share a canal. Do you need one person to report on that canal? Or can you take all 3 and then confirm or negate 2 of those data reporting items?
We can. We can we can accept all data and then disperse on the back side as long as we know which would be considered duplicative. If we've had that coordination process with those irrigation districts ahead of time, it can be sorted out. Yeah.
Right.
There's some of that, some of the irrigation districts have chosen to, you can see on the right hand side it says export manager. There's also an import manager where if they have a spreadsheet, that the one thing was we just needed to agree upon how's the data going to come in. And so we got everybody on the same page of, okay, we can at least agree this is how we're going to report it. So even if you don't want to take that full flow of we're going to do an iOS app in the field and collect it starting there, but I'm happy because I don't have the manpower. Maybe I don't have enough ditch tenders, or it's just not a possible thing for us at this moment. We don't have iPhones. I have a spreadsheet though. I can upload that to this, and then it'll populate itself in the database, and the process still flows through. So, like you're saying, as long as we have some coordination of like what we've agreed upon at the base level, we can get it in here and make it work.
I would also say that this kind of goes back to some of what we were talking about in session 2, which is that, you want to kind of mitigate or build as strong a foundation as possible upstream so that downstream the data is already clean, already trustworthy, and already as accurate as possible, right? So if you're, if you're in a well registration situation, somebody, let's say it's a paper form, and a grower fills out the paper form and then sends it, like snail mails it back to the GSA office. The GSA reads it, they read a letter or a number wrong, and then they're inputting into the system. That's like multiple points of entry, and you are setting yourself up for more errors downstream, right? So yes, it's very possible, but the more you can do to build that strong foundation from the outset, the better your data is going to be. Any other thoughts here? All right. I'm aware we have 5 minutes left. I kind of just wanted to touch quickly on edge cases, which I don't know if that's the right word for it because they are kind of edge cases, but they're actually very common. And allocations are kind of messy, and there's no way to do a one size fits all when you're going to be distributing, an amount to so many different people. There's naturally going to be kind of discrepancies in there. And so, without going into all of it, I would actually say that you should design for messiness, right? So, there's different types of allocations. You can do allocations by acre, by depth. I've seen some folks do it by beneficial use. So like, ag versus non-ag, by management zone. And there's several different cases that you will have to account for, right? Parcels that straddle 2 different GSAs, whose rules do you adopt for that? If there's two allocations in 2 GSAs and there's parcels that sit on the border of both, which allocation rules do you apply for that? There are crop changes mid-year, and how does the ET provider know about that and adjust the ET accordingly? What do you do in the case of shared wells, right? Whose responsibility is that? Whose asset is that considered, and who do the credits go to? So ultimately, water accounting will never be perfect, right? But the more you can connect your data and make sure that it's good quality from the outset, the better your data is, the better, the cleaner you keep it, and the more that it works and talks to each other, the more you're able to kind of investigate different scenarios and find those solutions. So it is a lot easier to solve those problems, or at least find a workable solution, when you have data that is relational and that's connected to each other. Yeah, edge cases, these are actually very interesting to me, more than anything else, but I know we have a couple minutes left only. And then I'll just close with saying that, as we know, different GSAs have different requirements. Not everybody's going to need to do water accounting in the same kind of way, but everybody will need to do some level of water accounting, because water accounting is basically saying, what are the ins and outs in your GSA? And even if you're doing baseline of just doing your annual report or your periodic evaluation, and you're not getting down to the granular parcel level, you will still need to understand, how much water is coming in, how much water is going out. And to be able to do that, I would always recommend trying to, move in the direction of a relational database, and finding some sort of strategy for connecting your data sets to each other. It doesn't always need to be a platform. It doesn't need to be anything in particular. It just needs to be useful to you, right? If you have data and you're doing data collection, which everybody's doing at some level, the data will become just kind of clutter if it's not talking to each other and letting you ask questions of it. So I would say the best way to do that is to design for where you're going. So if you know that certain policies are going to be coming up in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, I would advise to take a step back and say, okay, these are my policies that are coming up. What questions do I need to be able to ask of this data? How do I need to be able to communicate this policy to all the stakeholders? How do I collect data in a way that is defensible and builds trust? And then how do I remain accountable? So yeah, without that, you want to be able to handle complexity that water accounting demands. So I'll just leave it with, think about where you're going, try to future-proof it, and then that'll help you decide what kind of data you need to collect and what kind of water accounting you need to do. Any final thoughts?
I gotta jump. Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Alan.
I did have a question about, I think you might have talked about this and I probably missed it, but it sounds like you're mainly working with the GSAs in sort of like the Kings Basin region. Do you have plans to expand to GSAs outside that region, or what's kind of the scope that you're aiming for?
We actually work with the Monterey County Water Resources Agency, which is in Tara,
It's on the Central Coast.
it's its own Central
Central
Coast,
Coast,
San Ynez, yes, and then also the Eastern Management Area GSA. So that we have other GSAs too. They just weren't fitting into this specific presentation, but we do work with others outside of that area that are not in the probationary point, luckily.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Probationary are just interesting because they have different reporting requirements, and their need for water accounting is really intense because of those requirements.
It's actually really been helpful to see these different scenarios because it's helped shape our system and open our eyes up to, we need to be as flexible as possible. And it has been beneficial to be able to show other GSAs kind of the things that we've come across, even though they might be a little bit more straightforward. You always get these interesting scenarios where you need to be able to work with them.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thought I had, and part of why I'm asking about like the kind of the scope you have, is I feel like having all this data in one place connected to sort of the spatial orientation of like the parcels and things like that could be really useful for GSAs that are struggling with what's the word? Subsidence issues.
Right.
Or GSAs that are trying to implement water markets, but they know that they have like major sort of boundary issues where, they might have like a neighbor that's pumping and causing sort of detrimental impacts on the boundary or something like that. It really feels like this kind of information would help a lot with some of the decision making with that stuff.
Definitely agree with that. Did you have any GSAs in mind?
Not particularly. I mean, we've talked a lot with Aaron Fukuda from Kauai. We see him like at all kinds of events, and I know that they're dealing a lot with both of those issues, subsidence, and also with sort of boundary conditions where maybe the neighboring GSA is not on the same page, and also with trying to implement water markets and kind of being positive about water markets, but then once they started trying to implement them, I think they ran into some issues that they're not sure how to deal with right now. So I think they kind of put markets on the back burner for a minute because they need to figure things out before they use them.
Yeah, great point. And actually, I have had a couple of conversations with Aaron about water markets. So yeah, I totally understand where he's coming from. Thank you, Spencer.
Thanks so much. This was really great.
Awesome.
Right, well, I think Tara usually packages it up and sends it out for everyone to watch. It was recorded, and then if anybody has any questions or anything that we can help out with, we're always here and interested in talking, so.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you
thank you.
guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
one. Bye.
Bye.